2021. That's my new little tagline because, well, because you know what? So far, this has been a crazy, what is it, 8 days, 10 days? Um, it's been an interesting 2021 and the whole have my beer thing. So that's brought, welcome back, Ayesha, Adhami-Magueta, and myself. And we're here for Just Talking. So since we are starting off a new year, and really this started out of a basic conversation with Ayesha and myself, and I really like the conversations we get into. I like the depth that we get into. I like the way that we literally go side by side and then steer off a little bit and then go deeper or go different or go wider, and it's organic. And that really helped last year because for one of the reasons is that we were looking to provide structure, or, you know, I think in some of the times that we've been going through, we've been almost like giving permission in some cases, allowing ourselves to give ourselves permission to not be perfect and not be, you know, how to recognize when things are off in our bodies or in the way we're thinking. When is it good to take time to regenerate? And, you know, 2021, I think the pull for both of us as well is really not just talking, because it is important, but it's also about how to communicate with people that maybe don't see things exactly the same way as you do. And I think there's a lot of times, I know it probably doesn't come off as much when we're on screen, but like when we're just chatting, we have times where we don't see eye to eye, but it's seldom because we listen to each other, right? Like we try and listen to what the other person is saying. And sometimes it's like, you know, I know for me, for instance, Ayesha is so good. You are so good, my little air baby, at putting the exact words in place, or taking something that I conceptualize and putting it into like really tight words and a really tight description, right? And that helps because sometimes I can be way out here in airy fairy. And I think that's why it does work, right? Because we listen, and it's like, and as I listen to what Aisha's saying, sometimes it goes to me, oh yeah, well, and this way as well, like that, you know, and so I think, you know, anybody that knows the NLP world, there's chunking down and chunking up, right? So sometimes, and again, in the coaching world, you zoom in on something if you want to find out if there's an issue or a block to something specific, and you come out when you want to be able to give people a different perspective on how they're looking at things. And oh my gosh, darn, I am so feeling it, especially these days, especially with this last week, that I know that I myself, one of the keys that I am doing, and we're going to both cover a little bit about what it is that we actually do outside of this just talking, so we can give you a context in how we apply it in our lives. So my keys that really came up last week are advocating to yourself for yourself. So the kind of people that I love to work with, it's really allowing, you know, sometimes we will go to the mat for everybody else, but we won't do it for ourselves. And in some cases, and I know, like, for instance, in my own personal experience, there was trauma. And because of that trauma, it affected the way I thought. And then we get into the whole ego, but it's not just that. And it's not just as easy as, okay, I have a belief, because trauma actually rewires your nervous system. So, I mean, you know, I'm still having aha moments at 57 years old where it's like, oh, I can remember making choices and they didn't make sense to me when I made those choices. So if I could talk to that woman when I was, you know, 27 and going to the first person I talked to who was not helpful at all, I would have gone back to her and said, okay, listen, just start with you. You'll find the right people. You just need to get an intention that your healing matters. that your life matters, that your direction matters. And especially right now, anybody that comes to Tarot Tuesday, last week we had a totally profound reading. And again, this advocacy, the way I start that communication can be a palm reading, tarot reading, astrology I've used for years when I do training with people, because there's a lot of times that certain signs, I would notice that they would ask certain questions. So I don't do it so that every day you wake up and read your horoscope and say, oh, today's a really nice day. Although there is aspects of that I totally believe. I do it because I'm fire. I have the inability to not put my foot in my mouth. And one of the biggest aha moments for myself, and again, getting back to advocating to yourself for yourself, when I let myself off the hook to say, I'm never going to have the word finesse of an air baby like Ayesha. I can try. I can, I tend to, when I know that I'm talking, for instance, to a water baby when I'm fire, and the last thing that a water baby, like a crab, the last thing I want to do is talk at that person. I need to communicate with that person. And so I do some of these tricks, but I'm still me. So I don't beat myself up for that. So really, that's sort of the premise where I come with astrology. And then there's the basic coaching, NLP certified practitioner, coach and practitioner. But I've also done a whole bunch of different modalities, and especially healing with trauma. A lot of it is being comfortable in your body and knowing what messages send to your body. So that's me in a nutshell. And advocacy is really what we're looking at here in Just Talking for the 2021 year. So we're going to have some fun in 2021. So I've just been doing some yammering. So what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to pass it off to Ayesha to tell her story of again, advocacy and how what she does for a living, like what she brings to the table, and how she and that's really one of the reasons why we do this as well, is that both of us want to be able to provide a place where we can talk about things, not at people, but about things, about concepts, about mindsets, and to be able to expand a perspective. So over to you, Ayesha, who's our lovely diversity queen, and she is a little air baby, and I love her dearly. Okay.
I love you too, darling. Thank you so much. I think, like you said, one of the reasons why we work so well together is that our work and our personalities really complement one another. So I may have this great skill of being able to put the right words to a situation, but what I learned from you is I learned the expansiveness of being able to just be, to be in your skin, to be able to be yourself, and for that to not always come out perfectly, but to be able to still be able to communicate what it is that you want to get across to people, and to still move people with what you share. And and I think that that is a really amazing kind of thing to be in the presence of. So thank you for what you bring to the table, and thank you for your open-heartedness and your wholeness, because I think that for me in 2021, my word for this year is wholeness, and it's really being able to accept all the parts of myself that are not necessarily perfect, and that aren't always showing up in the best possible way, because that's the thing about it, is we're all here to learn in some way or another. And I think that the beauty of what you're also talking about in this space is that we're opening up a space where people can bring different ideas, and where we can learn how to listen to each other, because that is something that is very challenging in this period, because there's a lot of reactiveness, there's less responsiveness, there's less listening at a very deep level to really understand what is it that's to really be able to dig to what somebody's saying and get the real meaning of what they're saying. Because somebody might say one thing, but actually what their meaning is on a deeper level. It means something that is a little bit different than what they're actually saying, right? So it's a little bit about deeper listening. It's about being able to agree to disagree. It's being able to have respectful conversations about things that we are not necessarily on the same page on, right? And this is a skill, like this is an art. I did when I was doing my roundtables last year as a new coach. That was one of the things that I did was I went out and I launched a whole campaign of roundtables where I went to a local coffee shop and I had a space where we would talk about different topics. And one of the things that I talked about was the art of civil discourse, because that is something that's really gone down the tubes, you know, in the last couple of generations. And we really want to be able to bring that back, because if we don't have civil discourse, if we're not able to talk to each other and understand where people are coming from, then there's no way, then we're going to remain polarized. And for this earth to survive, and not just, we don't want it to survive, we want it to thrive. We want to protect the environment, we want to protect people, we want to support people, we want to empower people, right? How do we do that? We do that actually by and this is really the core of the work that I do, is that diversity is not just something that you name and you say, oh, you know, we're all diverse, we have different foods, and, you know, we have different clothing. It's, you know, it's not about that. Not entirely about that, right? That's an element of it. But it's about how are we able to allow each other to just be, to accept each other where we are. I had a really great conversation with a colleague of mine in the States, and we were talking about the difference between tolerance and acceptance, right? And I said to her, you know, I really just feel like we need to get to this place of acceptance where it's not about, oh, I'm going to tolerate you, but I'm going to accept you. And she said something that made me think. She said, you know, the thing is that you can't go from non-acceptance to acceptance. You have to come to tolerance first, and then you have to make that other step, you know. And so could help me contextualize it. You just can't go to the ideal. It's not a magical thing. I know that anyway, but you know, in your head, you're just like, well, come on, people, just accept it, right? And it's not going to work that way. We know that in personal change, what happens is it takes time for people to get from one place to another. And the same with, you know, big societal shifts like the ones that we are agitating for and the ones that we're really trying to motivate. So for me, as an equity and inclusion strategist, professional, as a professional coach, I'm also like you, Gwenda. I'm kind of exploring how do I support people that have experienced trauma, specifically childhood sexual abuse. How can I support people who have been through that as a coach? So those are some of my areas of focus for this year, and I look forward to learning and growing with you, with other people that that I'm in service to, and with the people that hopefully will join us on the program, where we can have conversations like this and talk about it. And also, you know, not everybody's on a path to enlightenment. And we really need to be in a place where we can not necessarily wag a finger anybody down, but we need to be able to accept that not everybody is in this place. Doesn't mean that they're a lost cause. It just means that this isn't the right time for them, right? And maybe there's no right time for them, but this is the world that we live in. We have to be able to, you know, be able to at least coexist in a civil way. How do we do that?
Awesome. And you just brought up something that we've touched on here before. Like we have touched on, you know, everybody has trauma, whether it's big T or small t. But right now, what happened last week in the States was traumatizing to the psyche of a nation, because and for all different reasons. But like the first thing, like I wrote about that in my story for Live Out Loud. And I specifically did it for, you know, people that had experienced inappropriate sexual attention, whether childhood sexual abuse, assault, sexual harassment, because that can come in a number of different ways. It's really about people in power. No, more importantly, it's about people when they feel powerless. And I'm bringing that up because, you know, the one thing that's interesting about the conversations that are going on these days is that, and we've talked a bit about this as well, I've been on these enlightened places where they talk about the fact that we the human race are at a consciousness level that now, if everybody's conscious and they make that choice to say, reimagine capitalism, or really commit to democracy and what that looks like, and to advocate for those that do not have, starting with Mother Earth. We all depend on Mother Earth. So, but you know, the thing that's interesting is you get these people, once you've been through a certain experience and you can see through a certain type of lens. So say you vibrate at 200, which is like, below that is anger, grief, you know, all these raw emotions that we saw climbing the walls last week of, you know, a building. There's a lot of those emotions. Now, if you're at a place of enlightenment or joy, you're vibrating at a different level, but you cannot go from here to here. As you said, you cannot go from being pissed off to acceptance by just pretending everything's okay. You have to be able to, you don't necessarily have to go through every single step, but you do have to be able to acknowledge where you are before you can climb that ladder, before you can, you know, you know, like, this is my joke, is that for the most part, my thoughts are positive, except for when I get stuck in the black hole of Facebook, especially this last week. But it's like, so that's why when people talk about, well, why don't they talk about COVID and how to lessen this? It's like, because if you're somebody whose body is not in physically good shape, you can take vitamin D all you want, but if your body isn't, like, your material plane body isn't processing that, you don't understand the Dr. Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton level of consciousness and the fact that we are all what we think, quite literally. If you can't grasp that concept, it doesn't matter how enlightened you are. Like, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get there in a week. There has to be work. There has to be a choice, an intention to be able to open up your mind and open up your heart. And that can come in a bunch of different ways. The best one in my experience is perception. And it's not even people talking at you. It's just people talking, right? So I used to say that with my dad, because my dad was a borderline personality disorder, but he was also extremely smart. And manipulation was what he liked to do, or that was part of his illness. And you know what? Putting a label on it to me isn't important. That was just part of my dad being my dad. So what I would do is I wouldn't talk at him. I would just leave him with a question. Or I would just, you know, the whole driving in a car time to ask people information about themselves is fabulous, because, oh, I'm just driving the car. I'm not even looking at you. And I'm just asking a question. And, oh, that's a big nugget that came out of that. That's a beautiful. And that's because both of your walls are down. You're not facing each other and going, oh, you're just driving in the car going, oh, so, like, you know, the one day, like, Dad, like, so, like, what would you want to be if you ever wanted to be it? Oh, a teacher. And then at the end of that, he goes, oh, aren't you clever? And it's like, I'm not manipulating you. I'm just trying to get to know you. But it's like, there's a lot of times where I would just ask him a question and leave it with him. So, you know, the challenge is when we're asking the questions or typing something on Facebook or responding to somebody in a meeting, you know, it's not like you give people a free pass, but you have to start with compassion. And that is not easy when things are high level. That's not easy when things are tense and, you know, like, even right now, there's a lot of tension that's going around. So that's my next input. What do you think about that, Ayesha?
I think that you've raised a really good point here. And I would say even if you aren't talking about something that's high level, even if you're talking about something that is a day-to-day understanding, there is some difference between how people perceive something and then how they engage it. So you can think about things like kindness, you can think about things like compassion, you can think about things like forgiveness, right? So someone might say, "Oh, I forgive you," but then they keep bringing up a particular topic, which
Mm,
shows that they actually have not been able to move on from it, right? Um, you can say, "Well, I know this in theory. I know what social justice is in theory," and then you might go ahead and act with privilege because
mm,
that's the way that you're used to acting, right? You don't think about what is the ramification of this. You're just like, "Oh yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do this because this is what I do all the time." So you're not, so you kind of know, yes, I support social justice, but not quite enough to make real, actual, impactful change in my life. So I think that it's a question also of understanding where the ideology meets the practicality,
mm,
where does it, are you actually able to take what you were thinking in your head or what you know to be the thing you want to align yourself with, and are you actually uh, are you actually showing up in the world in that way? Are you aligned with your values? And I think that's an interesting thing too, is that we see this in a lot of companies where they espouse particular values, but then something will come out where, okay, we're equal opportunity and we're all this stuff. But then when something happens, the first person that gets booted is a person of color or a person who's gay or what have you, right? So I think that it's a question of really recognizing if, first of all, are we acting in alignment? Do we actually understand our values? I think I'll just go right back to that to start
nice,
out with. Do we really
nice.
understand what it means to have this particular value and to be aligned with it? And then are we actually showing up in alignment with that value every single day? Because if we're not, then we can't say that we entirely espouse this. Then we have to have that, as those, any of us who have done a 12-step program, we know that it's about taking a fearless inventory, right? It's about really being brutally honest with yourself and saying, "You know what? I really, I went down the shitter this time. I really shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have said that, or, oh my gosh, why do I keep thinking about things this way when I know that it should be different?" Right? How are we really willing to make those changes? And that doesn't even start with anybody else. That just starts all right in here.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons, one of the things I was talking about for the last, oh my God, forever is learning to love yourself from the ground up. And it's like, yeah, but that sounds so airy fairy. And and that's why advocating for yourself to yourself, right? Because that's the interesting thing. You cannot, and I loved what you just said. Do we understand our values? Like, do we actually understand that when we have a value of honesty, honesty is not, per, per situation, I mean, I've been in situations where, I'm a community member, no matter where I go. And this does go back to a mission statement that I used to have in from my 20s, or I guess my 30s, which is to bring all that I am and all that I can be to whatever I do, whether it's work, personal, or community. Because I did a lot of volunteer work as well, right? So, and the thing that I just noticed the last week was that there was nothing in that value statement that said that I take care of me. So instead, everything that I was doing was for out there, and it had to start here. So again, it's one of those aha moments, right? The fun part about trauma, and again, any of you that know me, I use the word fun when that usually means like some sort of pain on some level where, you know, you know, where we finally understand why we think in a certain way. And once we have that awareness, because that's the whole thing, when we're changing our perception, it doesn't necessarily, it can happen in a second like that. Um, like I think a lot of people had a big wake up over the last week, because talk is talk. Everybody's been doing survivor type reality shows for years. Oh, having the quick comeback and the clap back and all that stuff. And now we're seeing the effects of people going, okay, so this is really the way, you know? Show me Bruce Willis who shoots up stuff. Show me, the Terminator who blows up stuff. Show me 15,000 Fast and Furiouses. All of these kinds of things and these kinds of ways that we talk to each other, and the lack of, as you said, civil discourse. And now it's like, yeah, but there's some people that listen. Our words matter. Our words matter. So first of all, when it comes to communicating, what's the intention of whatever you're communicating, right? And what's the intention of where we're going? And so this is why, I mean, I'm looking forward to doing with you, Ayesha, to doing some roundtables. So if anybody's interested and you have a topic that you want to talk about, or even just roundtable, because one of the other things is I just delved into I did another, because self-defense is also something that I do. And there's Gavin de Becker, which talks about a book. His book is The Art of Violence.
Fear.
The Art of
The Gift of Fear.
The Gift of Fear. Yes, sorry. And that's the whole thing, is you can see violence coming a mile away. And anybody that's experienced violence in any way, shape, or form knew that what was coming was coming. So the difference is there has to be a respect, but respect, and then you get the fine line between, is respect given or earned? And then there's, we can't keep bashing the other and expect the other not to bash back. We cannot separate ourselves. And I think that's the, again, so I love that. Out of anything tonight, do we understand our values? I love that, because, I heard somebody talking about, well, this is the Christian values that are, our community's based on. And it's like, those values are in the Judaism. Those values are in Islam. And this is one of the things, because if anybody, I mean, the poor little pagan community was rocked a little bit, because anybody that saw the guy with the horns, well, he's known as a shaman. He's known as a Norse shaman. That's his little title. We don't know. But again, so it's like, why are you bringing that into the pagan world? Because the pagan world is nothing about respect. There is no violence in that. We do not, in fact, we advocate for Mother Earth from the ground up. Anyways, that's just, so again, we cannot also just make it Christian values. And we need to, that diversity, you need to be able to look at it from anybody that you're communicating with, right? And what's the intention of what you're communicating?
Well, I think, I think that, I think it's also that you brought up a good point around capitalism, which is that one of the ways, one of the foundational things in capitalism is around competition. And so competition is built into everything that we do and everything that we say in this society. So when you're talking about Christian values, like you're talking about a hierarchy of values, you're talking about privilege in values, you're talking about position, you're talking about power, you're talking about all those things, right? And I, this is what I was talking about. So when I was talking about whether you're actually aligned with your values, because, in all the religions, all the great religions, whether it's, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, paganism. Like it's all about people living in community and collaborating with each other.
Yeah.
It's not about competing with each other. It's not about putting each other down. It's not about trying to best somebody. It's about how do we work together to create an equitable space for everybody, right? So when you know, and this is a thing that I love about religious people, because when they talk about their scripture, they talk about religion, they're talking about it from a very selective place. What are the values that I'm going to choose to espouse and align myself with? And what are the ones that I can conveniently just disregard, right? Because you can't really. I mean, what are you actually doing when you're not willing to share, when you're not willing to give, when you have to amass you know, everything for yourself at the expense of other people? Then that's not a value that aligns with any of the great faiths of the world. So, you know, so I think and that goes back to, do you understand your values? Because that's exactly the question. Do you understand your values, and do you know how to engage the world in alignment with those values, right? So,
And then you get into any of the spiritual, you know, series is, you know, being in congruence, because that's one of the biggest things is if you're not walking the walk that you talk, it literally rips you apart. Because if you have to go into that workplace that you know is not, doesn't represent what you do, and you're doing that from a fear of not having enough, whereas again, like, and I always go back to when I was living in the Bahamas, and I had this woman who literally had nothing. And she was like so proud of her country. It was in New Providence. She's like, oh, I'll show you around. I'll take you. This woman had no two nickels to rub together. Yet some of the expats that I worked with, their sense of entitlement was so offensive. I just literally couldn't hang around with anybody that was from any kind of place that wasn't there. And why is that? Because it's like, man, I can't even take your, I just can't even handle. I can't even I can't even believe that those words come out of your mouth. Like, I don't know if, did you see the little girl that jumped, little girl, and I call her a little girl. She's 22 and she jumped that teenage boy who was with the iPhone in New York. I know this shows that I've been doing too much on social media, but she jumped this. There's a really well-known jazz musician was there with his son, and his son was walking with the iPhone, and this girl had apparently misplaced her iPhone, so jumped, tackled this kid, and so she was on with Gail King, and Gail King's going like, well, you know that it's not right to jump people, and she literally did this to Gail. Enough. She's being interviewed by like Gail King. Enough. And it's like, so, you know, this is the whole thing is that, you know, when Clueless came out when we were younger, it's one thing about providing your children with things that you wish that you had had. But if you had had those things, you might not have been working as hard as you were to get to where you wanted to be. So I think that there's also, you know, a fine line between first of all, you get wealthy because of all hard work. It's not all that. Just growing up in the right neighborhood and going to the right school and having just being in proximity to somebody that offers you an opportunity can be all that it is that gets you to wherever. But that's for another day. But I think that it's important that if I ever acted like that, Ayesha, and you didn't like metaphorically bitch slap me upside the head, we would not like, do you know what I mean? I would expect nothing less from anybody that I know. And the great thing is that people have done it. You know, like when I say something to somebody like, correct me if I'm wrong. And I remember this once, this little water baby, and she was like, well, you're wrong. And it's like, okay. And it was like, you didn't have to be so, I knew that you had to be as vehement because a lot of times I'm mouthy and people think that I don't listen to them. And maybe that's true too. I don't know. I'm not in other people's skins, but it's like, okay, now we can do something, right? Like as long as we speak our truth when we need to and just find that courage to understand that we're all part of this community. We are all part of this community. And if we can't understand each other enough to want to work on something better, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you 100%. And I think, what you just said is really resonating with me. And that is that you don't have to, but,
Hmm.
there was a time in my life when I thought I knew everything and I thought I knew best for everyone.
Yep.
And, it was my job to save the world and I knew better than everybody else. And, 20 years on from that, boy, oh boy, I'm just like, holy arrogance. Like, what the hell was I thinking? Like how could I possibly have thought? And, and I've had people say to me, I know you better than you know yourself. And that's that's something I react to a lot. But also I think back to that time and I may not have explicitly said that, but I behaved in that exact way with other people. So now I'm very cognizant of the fact that in this space and time, I only know what I know and I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And so really I'm trying to come to everything with as much of a learning mindset as I possibly can, because I don't know everything.
Yeah.
And, and I don't think I'd want to know everything. I'm a lifelong learner. I want to spend my life learning, but in order to create connection with people, you need to be in a place where you're not prescriptive, where you're just open to whatever they're sharing. And if you can be in that place, I don't mean you, I just mean rhetorical you.
No.
If you can hear it and not judge it, that is amazing. And I can't say that I'm in that place, but I aspire to be in that place, to be able to hear people with kindness and compassion and non-judgment. It's something that I work at every day. I'm not perfect at it. I make mistakes at it, but I aspire to it. And that's, I think, part of how we connect with each other is if we can create that space where we allow ourselves and we allow other people to just be, right? And it's tough when you're dealing with people that are racist or misogynist or homophobic. It's very, very difficult to just, kind of go, okay, I can't agree with you. I understand where you're coming from, and we're just going to have to end this conversation here.
Yeah.
Respectfully, right? Because I can't agree with you, but I do understand where you're coming from. And I'm going to respectfully disengage from this conversation now. It's not an easy thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, exactly. I love it. And I love that because I remember once actually, as you were talking, I remember a conversation when I was in my 20s. And this person that I was talking to, because I was listening to what she said. So I started off saying something and then she ended up saying something else. And then I took that in and I went, yeah. And I did keep focused on the intention. And so I came back and I said, well, it's this and this. And then she said, oh, you should be a politician. You're changing your mind. And it's like, I'm not changing my mind. I'm trying to communicate to you something that obviously wasn't clear enough the first time around, right? But so even if we're wrong, right, then we've got to own it, all of us, whoever we are, right?
Yeah.
And thank you, and I know you've helped me on that. Just recently, love you to death for the, I know somebody, and it's like you're right. You know what? But to me, again, because I know how I am, I knew that was a trigger. I knew that there was something more there. And so that allowed me the gift of self-reflection. But if you're not in that place, so it's like two different situations, because the original one, although it was years ago, my intention was to communicate something to this person. And obviously I wasn't doing a great job of it, or they just saw it in their way. And so as soon as she said that about, oh, you should be a politician, I just went, and I smiled and I didn't even, I said, okay. And then I just left it, because half of it too is being open to that conversation. So are you trying to prove me wrong, or are you trying to you know, see things in a different way. And that's half of it too, is knowing when to walk away and knowing when to, you know, leave with love. And that's my thing, that it's like, I just left going, okay, well, it doesn't change the fact of how I care about you or don't care about you, but I'm just going to leave this be because I'm not going to get anything. Whereas the other difference is knowing that if I'm getting it because it's in my heart and I feel like I have to be right, there's something, that's a me thing. That's about me, right? That's about, and I think that's half of it too, is owning our own stuff, right?
Yeah, I think too, the other thing that I've learned is that sometimes even when we're coming to a conversation with the best of intention about what we want to say and what we want to communicate, sometimes that moment is not for us to give something to someone else.
Yeah.
Sometimes that moment is for us to receive a message for ourselves, right? So when you're talking about this person from such a long time ago, and you walked away from that conversation, as you were talking about that, I was thinking maybe that wasn't a moment that was meant for her. Maybe that moment was meant for you to be able to just say, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. This is what I needed to know from this conversation, is that that's just what I need to know. You don't need to you don't need to know anything. This conversation was actually for me, you know, and it's just being able to, like you said, like to take that moment to just reflect. Like I look back on a lot of moments for myself in the same way, where I was trying so hard to convince somebody or to talk to somebody or to share something. And then I missed the whole opportunity to just self-reflect and go, oh, wait a minute, it's not even about you. This is actually about, what do I need to say? And sometimes it's not what we need to say to other people. And going back to your point of advocating to yourself for yourself, sometimes what we're having to do is articulate something so we can hear it ourselves, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's the other thing. I mean, God knows I'm still not perfect at that, because I am totally aware that I've got no filter. And sometimes stuff just comes out and it's like, oh no, that one hurt. And especially if I'm, you know, not in a good space, that's where I've done damage, right? And stuff comes out that I normally wouldn't say, but it's, you know, you look at fire. I still own anything that I've said. I own what I do. But I think that, again, the great part is I can also reflect back on, you know, random conversations that you have. And there's a kernel of information that comes through a conversation that you don't even think was a thing. And then all of a sudden, one day you're doing something and you remember this little kernel. And then that flowers into this wonderful perspective, or, oh, now that's what that meant, right? So even, you know, that's the whole thing. I think that there's a lot of times where you can agree to disagree with people, but the intention of wanting to connect, if that's there, it makes a difference in the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not always going to be the compassionate, wonderful human beings that we think that, you know, that we have on our vision board. We're not always going to be that perfect, but we need to perfectly love ourselves no matter where we are, and just continue to strive. You know, as the Oprah saying, when I know better, I'll do better, right? Or Maya Angelou, I'm not sure who actually said that, but it's like, you know, I think that that's the biggest thing, is that when I know better, I strive to do better. But I love this. Out of anything that's gone on, we've really gone on, like we're on 45 minutes now, but the key out of this whole night, first of all, we're going to have fun in 2021. That's our little, well, I don't know, that's what I did tonight. But do we understand our values? So everybody's doing, what's your word of the year? Do you understand what that word means for you? Do you understand what that means to walk in those shoes? Right? So thank you. That's like the golden nugget for me anyway, right? So yeah, I love that
Thank
as well.
you. Thank you, darling.
So
That's
any last
awesome. Thank you.
thoughts?
No, I think I've run the gamut of what I wanted to say for today. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, I love you. So yeah,
Love
and
you
second
too.
of all, what we're going to do, guys, is that in the moving forward, we are going to have like you know, the first and second week is going to be talking about something. Then we are going to be looking to have a panel at least once a month. So we will be sending out, like actually, so just in advance, I think we're still going to go with our February. Our
Okay,
February focus is going to be on death and dying, and talking about different aspects. And so again, for the last episode of the month, we're going to be doing a round table of a couple of different people that are, like, I know one of my friends, I haven't asked her, I'm sure she'll love to join us. But she's a death doula and a certified grief counselor. And then of course, there's going to be our different aspects of it, because we're pretty well on opposite sides when it comes to that experience. And then we'll be having another guest as well to join us. So, and that'll probably, those shows will probably be closer to an hour, because we want to be able to actually flesh into stuff. But I mean, this one's closer to an hour, but that's what we're looking at doing for this year. And we're also going to be looking to get this onto a Just Talking page so that it's easier to find. And we hope that you'll join us on a regular basis. And again, Ayesha, I love you. I love our conversations. I love our conversations. I love you. I'm so glad you're in my life. So.
me too. I love you, babe. Thank you so much. This is beautiful as always. And I'm so excited to be going into another year of Just Talking with you. Such a gift that you invited me to be a part of this. And yeah, I just adore you. And I learned so much from you. So thank you so much for being a good mentor and a good teacher for me as well.
Thank you. Back at you. And then I think maybe we'll have some, some guests, not next week, the week after, right?
Yes, I think so.
So yeah. Next week, we don't really know exactly how that's going to play out, but we'll let you know in the week, in the middle. So.
Oh, we could talk a little bit more about living in alignment with your values.
I love that. I totally love that. So if anything, it might be like a little mini workshop on how that looks like. And maybe, so anybody that has an idea of what their value is, maybe come to the table next week, and we'll each get a word or words, and then actually break down what that means to actually move in those, to actually understand those values. I love it. I love it. Yeah. See, it's like when you follow what's there, things unfold as they're supposed to, right? We don't need to know the whole staircase. We just need to know the next steps, so we don't fall on our face. Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Love you. See you all next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.